The judge froze in court when he saw me, and in that single suspended moment, the entire federal courtroom in downtown Chicago seemed to forget how to breathe, because Judge William Crown was not a man who froze. He was known across the United States as iron-willed, fearless, and untouchable. Yet there he was, pale as marble, his fingers tightening around the gavel as if it were the only thing keeping him upright, while lawyers, journalists, jurors, and spectators watched in confusion, unaware that the past had just walked through the doors wearing a simple gray suit and carrying nothing but patience sharpened over 22 long years. To them, I was no one important, just another observer in the gallery attending the high-profile corruption trial of Senator Robert Halston, a political giant accused of laundering millions through shell companies and federal contracts, a case the media had branded the trial of the decade. But to the judge, I was the living proof of a crime he had buried under ash and lies, and when our eyes met, I saw recognition flare in his. The same look he'd worn long ago on a night filled with smoke, sirens, and fire, because he remembered me, even if he had spent decades convincing himself that I was dead or broken or forgotten. The courtroom buzzed until his gavel slipped from his hand and struck the desk with a hollow crack, forcing a recess that no one had requested, and as people whispered and cameras zoomed in on his trembling face, I remained still, because I had waited my entire life for this silence, a silence born not of respect, but of fear, and as the judge left the bench without explanation, my mind drifted back to Cleveland, Ohio, to a quiet neighborhood where my childhood ended in flames, where my father, Daniel Hale, a federal financial investigator, had uncovered a network of corruption linking politicians, judges, corporations, and organized crime, a network Judge Crown sat at the center of, and the night before my father was scheduled to testify, our house caught fire, an electrical accident, according to official reports signed and sealed within hours, reports that claimed both my parents died instantly, reports that never mentioned the smell of gasoline or the shadow I saw moving down the hallway before the smoke swallowed everything, reports that never explained why Judge Crown himself arrived at the scene long before any official investigator, kneeling in front of me as firefighters pulled bodies from my home, telling me softly that everything would be taken care of, and it was just not for us, because the investigation vanished, the evidence disappeared, my father's files were erased, and I was sent into foster care under a different name, shuffled between homes like a piece of inconvenient paperwork, while the men responsible climbed higher into power, protected by the very system my father had believed in. Growing up, I learned that justice in America was not blind, it was selective. And I learned to survive quietly, to observe, to remember, to study, because while others healed or forgot, I prepared, devouring books on law, criminal psychology, and federal procedure, not because I wanted to be a lawyer or a hero, but because I wanted to understand the machine that had crushed my family and learn exactly where to place my hands when the time came to stop it. And over the years, I became many things under many names, an analyst, a consultant, a background figure in federal agencies, always invisible, always listening, always collecting fragments of the truth my father had died for, piecing together encrypted notes he'd hidden, offshore transactions he'd flagged, shell companies that funneled money through judges who sold verdicts and politicians who sold laws, and slowly, carefully, I rebuilt the case that fire was meant to destroy, knowing that revenge rushed is justice denied, and that the only way to expose monsters was to let them feel safe first. Senator Halston's trial was the final piece, the perfect stage, because every corrupt player would be watching, including Judge Crown, nearing retirement and eager to close one last case with his reputation intact, unaware that the man he'd erased as a child had orchestrated every detail that brought him there, from leaked documents to anonymous tips, from the sudden resurfacing of financial audits to the federal authorization that appeared on the prosecutor's desk that very morning, and when court resumed after the recess, Judge Crown avoided looking at me, his voice strained as he ordered proceedings to continue, but the control he once wielded effortlessly now slipped through his fingers, because when the prosecution announced newly approved classified evidence tied directly to the judge himself, confusion rippled through the room, and for the first time, Judge Crown objected not with authority, but with panic, snapping that the evidence was inadmissible, only to be told it had been cleared at the highest level, and when he turned toward me again, silently asking a question he was too afraid to speak, I gave him my answer by standing and saying my name, Ethan Hale, a name that shattered whatever composure he had left, because Hale was the name he had burned, the name he had buried under legal paperwork and ash, and as murmurs turned into gasps and reporters whispered frantically, I told the courtroom who my father was, when he died, and why, explaining calmly that the fire ruled an accident occurred exactly one day before testimony that would have exposed Judge Crown's role in a web of bribery and obstruction, and while the judge struggled to respond, screens across the courtroom lit up with evidence that could not burn, bank transfers, audio recordings, altered court rulings, and finally the original fire investigation report, digitally restored to reveal Judge Crown's signature approving falsified conclusions, and as federal agents entered the room to place him under arrest, the same room he had controlled for decades watched him collapse into silence, a powerful man reduced to a trembling defendant, while Senator Halston's case unraveled alongside his, and as Judge Crown was led away, passing me with eyes filled not with anger but disbelief, I realized that justice does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it waits patiently, growing stronger while evil grows careless. And outside the courthouse when reporters surrounded me asking why I waited so long, why now, why today, I looked into the camera and said the truth my father never got to say, that justice delayed is still justice if someone survives long enough to deliver it. And as I walked away, unnoticed by most, I understood that no one had ever really known who I was, not a victim, not a witness, but the consequence of believing a child would forget a fire, the consequence of thinking truth could be erased. The consequence of assuming the past stays buried, because sometimes it doesn't come back screaming, sometimes it walks quietly into a courtroom, waits to be seen, and lets the guilty destroy themselves.